I decided, it's so important to learn the laws of Shabbat. They come up every week, and this week's parsha is Vayakal Pekudei. The Torah is, this week's parsha talks about don't work on Shabbat, don't light fire. But we want to go a little bit on something that's very common, and that is one allowed to very simply ride a bike on Shabbat? Because there's a famous tshuva from the Ben Ish Chai, playing basketball, playing soccer. And I was just telling the students here, the Talmidim Hayekarim Mipaz, that I specifically like to deal with topics that are common, fascinating, and also there's some deeper values, right? We want to go not just to the surface, the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. So to start off, the halacha is very simple. Rav Ovadia Yosef, in volume 4 of his Hazon Ovadia, his very, very deep laws of Shabbat, argues with the Ben Ish Chai on halacha, chapter 1, halacha 3, page Mem. And what does Rav Ovadia say? Rav Ovadia says that Pashut HaMinhag, the tradition of Orthodox, law-abiding, halachic citizens, is that you should not ride a bike. And Rabbi Best, the posek of LA, based on what he heard from Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, and we're going to mention that again at the end of this year, says scooters are the same thing. Scooters are also a two-wheel transportation item. Again, I want to say something. I'm going to say it 3 times because...
One second. The Ben Ish Chai says it's okay to do it?
Yeah, we're going to get into it. The whole shir is going to be about that. But we're just saying the Psak Halacha, then we'll go into Rav Ovadia's logic and all the different machlekes hapoiskim. Rav Ovadia says that the tradition of Orthodox Judaism, according to him, has been that we should not drive bikes. We should not ride bikes on Shabbat. Obviously, we're talking about non-electric bikes. Everybody holds electric is a problem. Everybody holds that if you don't have an Eruv on Shabbat, it's a problem because it's carrying, right? This is the Ben Ish Chai and Rav Ovadia is talking on Yom Tov, right? We're going to get into... They asked the Ben Ish Chai in Rav Po'alim,
his Shelot and Shuvot,
Chelik Aleph, Teshuvah 25, somebody, a Baghdadi Jews like Rav Yaakov Hillel, was living in Bombay. Yeah, Bombay. So on Yom Tov, he gave him a heter, the Ben Ish Chai. So the Ben Ish Chai, we're going to go very deep into this. Rav Ovadia's position on riding a bike on Shabbat is that it's forbidden. Why? Based on the Gemara in Shabbat 113, based on the words of our prophet Yeshaya, it says, Im tashiv mishabat raglecha. On Shabbat, you're not supposed to run or take unusually large steps. And it says the way you walk on Shabbat should be different. Shabbat, we're entering the Garden of Eden. That's why I wanted to bring kind of like the hashkafa and the spirit of the law to understand the letter of the law. What Rav Ovadia is saying is basically Shabbat is a different day. The whole environment of it is different. The taste of it is different, right? The psychology of it is different. What we think should be different. What we talk about should be different, right? We're entering a different zone, a zone of peace and tranquility, menucha, right? So, according to Rav Ovadia, riding a bike on Shabbat is something that one does on weekdays. If you do it on Shabbat, it's uvdin dechol, right? It's like the same thing as exercising, which is something that is appropriate not for Shabbat, but for weekday. God knows, never in the history of mankind have we been so zombied by our silly phones that make us more sillier and addicted and zombies by the day, right? It's like sheep to the slaughter, right? We've lost our self-control. So, Rav Ovadia, under no circumstances, allows the riding of bikes. He says, even if you want to go to a mitzvah, which really was the context of the Ben Ish Chai, the guy lived far away from shul and he wanted to attend shul on Pesach and Shavuot, even though there was no Eruv there. So let's get into the thing. Now, I want to bring out another very important concept here, because I put a note here to make sure that I think. It is so sad that critics of Rav Ovadia, people that are not fans of him, or people that are, and some of them are even Talmidei Chachamim, Rachmana litzlan, that have this misconception. They think Rav Ovadia was, and it really pains my heart, that's why I wanted to bring this out. Some people have this terrible misconception that Rav Ovadia inevitably, automatically, is always lenient in everything. Well, guess what? Here's a classical example that Rav Ovadia will forbid you riding a bike on Shabbat, as did many other Ashkenazic poskim. The one that I'm the closest to and I have the most respect for is Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, because he's my Rebbe's grandfather-in-law. And he was Rav Aaron Kotler. When he had a question what to do in life, he'd get advice from Rav Yaakov. So that's how smart Rav Yaakov was. And this is really going into the fifth chelik of Shulchan Aruch with both. Like another example is wigs, right? Rav Ovadia is totally against women wearing wigs. So here's two concrete examples of Rav Ovadia being extremely machmir. And it's very disrespectful and disgusting and just childish. Somebody like this belongs in Pre 1A. To think, Rav Ovadia, when he gives his psak halacha, he's from the school of Bet Hillel. He has the guts, and he brings 50 different reasons why he's being lenient. And it's a terrible misconception to think that everything that Rav Ovadia says is just off the bat, what? A leniency. So now let's digest this. There are many poskim that don't like riding a bike for another reason that Rav Ovadia brings. The first one was a great Moroccan rabbi posek. His name was Rav Yosef Mashash. He wrote Shalot to Shov the Mayim Chaim. He happens to be very liberal.
Mashash should be Masas.
Masas, yeah. Masas, Chacham Yosef Masas happens to have very liberal opinions on a lot of things, but this thing is terribly against. He says that for sure it's asur to ride a bike on Shabbat. Why does Rabbi Masas say that? Because he says it has a terrible, especially you have to understand,
because of
the chain and the bike could break.
And then you're going to repair it.
And that's right, Makabe Patish, right? Anybody would be a 2-year-old kid not to know this. When in Shabbat this week it says don't light fire. Fire is just the most classic example. There's 39 things forbidden on Shabbat. And the last one, which is the most confusing, because this week my students from Eretz Yisrael asked me this, is Makabe Patish, to make something incomplete complete, or fix something. So Rav Mashash says, listen, the reason why we shouldn't ride a bike on Shabbat is because it's almost inevitable that if you want to ride it on Shabbat, then one of the times the chain's not going to fall out, or
then you're going to fix it,
and the tire's going to pop, and then you're going to go and you're going to be stuck, and your whole Shabbos is going to be ruined. And then, anybody that learns the Hilachot Shabbat in depth knows that a lot of things, when a person's panicked, he may desecrate Shabbat because he's not in his right mind. So Mashash says, Asur, because something's going to break and then you're going to come to fix it. The Ben Ish Chai, which is the classical lenient opinion on this, begs to differ. He says, first of all, it's okay to ride a bike on Shabbat. Now, the Ben Ish Chai, honestly, in all fairness, was talking about, like I told you, somebody was
very specific.
Yeah, somebody was in Bombay, and then, if you don't attend, if you're not, let me say Dvar Torah on the Parsha also, just for a second. Vayakel, my Rosh Hashiva used to say, Vayakel means Kehila. Now that we see almost 70% of Jews going off the derech and becoming goyim, assimilating, is because we Jews need each other. We Jews need to be in a ghetto. Now, a modern ghetto, we need to be part of a community. When you live in a far-off place, do you know how many hundreds of thousands of Israelis, their grandchildren are goyim? Because from the 50, 60 years ago. They speak Hebrew, right? They may know Tanakh, but they're secular Jews. They move to the most oddest and weirdest and out-of-town communities. So what the Ben Ish Chai was doing there was like, hey, it's totally okay to drive to get to be part of the community, to get to shul. And again, a disclaimer, this is talking a place that either had an Eruv, Mumbai did not have a Mumbai did not have an Eruv, so Ben Ish Chai was giving this heter for when? Shabbat, because it would have been impossible for Yom Tov, for the holidays, because it would have been impossible for the guy to get to daven in shul without the assistance of a bike. Ben Ish Chai rejects all of these things. He says, first of all, based on the Rosh in chapter 2, Siman 15, there's so many new gadgets and gizmos that have been invented since the time of the Talmud that could break. Are you going to say all of them are forbidden to use because they, right? Like an ice cream scooper. I don't know. Whatever. He says we cannot create new rabbinical decrees after the time of the Talmud. So for sure, he argues vehemently on Rav Masas. Tosfot in Chulin.
Was Rav Masas at the same time as the Ben Ish Chai?
I'm not sure about that. I didn't have time to research that, but Ben Ish Chai already had critics for his heter. Understand?
Okay, so there's
two
post the Ben.
Yeah. There's two different schools of thought here, which means Ben Ish Chai is such a great gaon that he's going to barvorn, right? He's going to predict the problems with his heter, right?
Or he did it himself, really? Or he
Right,
did his
yeah.
heter and then he said the problems with it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he's saying, don't come and tell me. And by the way, Rav Ovadia concurs with all of this. We're going to see that there's different poskim that had different problems with bikes on Shabbat. And ultimately, Rav Ovadia agrees to Ben Ish Chai in the theory that these are not forbidden for the reason that you're going to fix and repair the bike, but rather, like we said in the beginning of this year, because it's not in the spirit of Shabbat, and the scooter or bike are treating the Shabbat. And so let's go a little bit deep here, because it's very fundamental. He says, Tosfot in Chulin also says that just because the rabbis forbid something in their time, don't compare apples to apples and say, oh, if the rabbis were alive, they'd make this also asur. You can't make new gezerot. That's why we have Amoraim and Tanaim, and that's why we have Geonim. From the time of the Geonim on, you can't make new rabbinical decrees, right? Like Chol Yisrael. Only in the time of the Tanaim or Amoraim, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, right, or the Sanhedrin, they could have made such things that it should be binding. The Ben Ish Chai wrote a second book, which I had actually till today never heard of, but it's unbelievable, Rav Ovadia's scope of knowledge, called the Yedei Yosef. On page Kuf Tzadi Tet, he reinstates, and with extreme vigor, he backs up his original psak in Rav Po'alim, and what does he say? And I'll read it verbatim. Shafilu dvarim sheosim leitkalkel kulim matzu. He says, even though you may want to argue that it's, especially you have to understand, I think bikes had just come out then, so even if you want to say that it's very probable that it's going to break, if Chazal, if in the Talmudic times bikes didn't exist and the Chachamim didn't explicitly say bikes are asur, we have no halachic permission to make up new rules, right? From our own mind. Again, I don't care if you say this is terribly common and probable. Since the rabbis of the Talmud didn't forbid it, we don't have the capacity or power to forbid it. Okay? So we can't make up new rules. This is something that Ben Ish Chai argues, and Rav Ovadia agrees with this. It happens to be that one of the great chief rabbis, great poskim of a few hundred years ago, also concurs with the the Rishon LeZion, Rab Chaim Moshe Eliashar also brings down in his book the Ben Ish Chai's halacha. He says, listen, if you need to get to shul or you have an Eruv, strings or walls around your city that halachically have been approved for carrying, you could also ride a bike. But this brings us to one of the great Sephardic poskim. His name is Rav Ovadia Hodaya. He had the same name as Rav Ovadia. And before Rav Ovadia became famous, before Rav Ovadia became extremely famous around the world, one of the chief Sephardic poskim was this Chacham Hodaya, Ovadia Hodaya. He vehemently argues with the Ben Ish Chai. He does not like the Ben Ish Chai at all. What does Rav Hodaya say? He says, first of all, the facts of the matter is bikes are always getting messed up, right? And by fixing them, at worst, you're going to do a Torah violation. At the minimum, you're going to do a rabbinical violation, right? Because again, you have to understand, you're going to carry the tires and you're in Reshut HaRabim. People are not biking in their house, right? It's in a place that you may... Outside, and also you go far places and exotic places. And, this stuff is very good arguments. Because you could bike 20 miles on a Shabbat in the summer, right? Into a far foreign land where you're not familiar. And when you're biking there, you could, get stuck and you'll be very alarmed. And you're going to come things that you shouldn't do, right?
Go from here to Long Beach.
Yeah, you could go here to Long Beach, for example. The korov levadai she'yavo lektaktam b'Shabbat dechen minatem alagon. So Rav Ovadia Hodaya says, where was it? This is very uncharacteristic of the Ben Ish Chai. I'm astounded that he would be so lenient. And he says, he claims that the Ben Ish Chai was not, it was a new invention in the time of the Ben Ish Chai, and Ben Ish Chai had never necessarily, Ben Ish Chai, we know that Ben Ish Chai had Gili Eliyahu. Yeah. Ben Ish Chai had much better things. The Ben Ish Chai, a grandson of the Ben Ish Chai Shamash, said that his grandfather died because the Ben Ish Chai had once told him, a certain hour of the day, under no circumstances come in. He came in, he saw like an angelic white person learning with the Ben Ish Chai. Later they found out that was Eliyahu Hanavi, but since the Shamish, the Ben Ish Chai's servant, if you see what you're not supposed to see, then you're going to go bye-bye.
Yeah.
So
and also another point to also make clear is that you can't just pick and choose whatever you want.
No, exactly. So the Yaskel Avdi is very uncomfortable with this permission of the Ben Ish Chai to ride a bike. He says the Ben Ish Chai probably never rode a bike. It was a new invention. He didn't know the metziut, that it breaks down. And he claims that he heard from some people that Ben Ish Chai retracted his ruling.
Really?
Yeah.
Or it's not in writing.
Yeah, it's not in writing. He says that I talked to some Baghdadi Jews, and it seems that Ben Ish Chai, after he became... So this Rav Ovadia rejects.
So this is like a
so this is a controversial, very controversial. The Yaskel Avdi in 3 different places argues on it. And the first place that
what was the Yaskel Avdi again?
Rav Ovadia Hodaya, the posek of the generation before Rav Ovadia, which means
Rav Hodaya, was he also Baghdadi?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think it was Yerushalmi. Doesn't matter. He was in touch with many Baghdadi Jews.
Okay.
And Baghdadi Jews he says that he has some verifiable information that the Ben Ish Chai later on, when he found out the true colors of this, he went against it. Rav Ovadia vehemently rejects this. Why? He says, first of all, we know from the Noida B'Yud and the Hazon that somebody that was an angel of Hashem, and I want to go because your twin brother was very makbid about this. The Ben Ish Chai is holy of holies. The Ben Ish Chai was universally accepted by all Sfardim as our Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, as our mini Shulchan Aruch. So the Hazon and the Noida B'Yehuda bring down that the Yaskel Avdi is saying, a rumor that's... I heard from some people that the Ben Ish Chai retracted is not valid halachically. Because the Ben Ish Chai is not going to do rabbinical malpractice. He means what he says, and he says what he means. Especially somebody that had Ruach HaKodesh, like the Ben Ishchai.
And even let's say he did retract it. He would have written it
No,
down.
so exactly, he would have written it down. If we don't have something in writing, and Rav Ovadia brings a second, Rav Ovadia is very uncomfortable and rejects the claims of the Yaskel Avdi. Why? Because he says something, and this is a fascinating thing, that he says like this. He says, first of all, that second source that I brought you from the Ben Ishchai, the Sefer Yedei Chaim, it seems from Rav Ovadia's knowledge, was written towards the end of the Ben Ishchai's life. And again, he's saying to ride a bike is okay. So he says this claim is not valid. To come and say that, the Ben Ishchai retracted his psak is not right. And not only that, the Kaf HaChaim, which is the Mishnah Berurah of the Sfardim, brings down the Ben Ishchai and agrees with it. So what the Kaf HaChaim was Baghdadi. So for those many different reasons, there's a Noida Yehuda and a Hazon that writes that you can't make up that a Rav, even if a Rav says something controversial, if he's a great Chacham, they bring rayas from Shas. Yeah. That you can't come and say, just because you don't like it, you want to do what the Yaskel Avdi does and says, I heard a rumor. He would have had the integrity. Listen, our rabbis are so great and so humble, which is their hallmark, right? Of their greatness, that he would have had the integrity to have what?
Committed this in writing.
Committed it in writing. But now we want to start going to back up Rav Ovadia's position. Rav Ovadia brings that there was a great Av Beis Din, Rav Salman Mani. He was the son of Rav Eliyahu Mani, which the Ben Ishchai has an unlimited respect for. The Ben Ishchai many times would ask Rav Eliyahu Mani what was the Kabbalist of Chevron and Yerushalayim's minhag. So the son of Rav Eliyahu Mani, which was the Av Beis Din of Chevron, one of the 4 holy cities of Judaism, he already starts a little bit being uncomfortable with the Ben Ishchai. He says the Ben Ishchai was lenient.
This is like such a sticking point of the Ben Ishchai.
Yeah, so he says that I don't have the guts to argue on the Ben Ishchai. If the Ben Ishchai said it, he's such a holy angel that I don't want to argue with him. But Rav Salman Mani, the chief rabbi of Hebron, does already start going away from the Ben Ishchai's cheter, and he says, "Hamachmir tavo alav beracha," which means if you want to be strict, it's better not to go on this leniency of the Ben Ishchai. Okay, and this brings us to one of the great German rabbis, which in his idea, he has a second problem with what the Ben Ishchai says. In Shalot Teshuvat, Rabbi Ezriel Hildesheimer, chapter Teshuvah 49, he says that when you ride a bike, especially when it's wet, you're making grooves in the land, in the dirt. And one of the things that's forbidden to do on Shabbat, actually the first of the 39 malachot, is to dig. So by you making grooves, you're digging. And he brings a Magen Avram. There's a Magen Avram that holds that it's true we're allowed to move stuff on the ground. But the Magen Avram says that if you move extremely heavy objects that for sure are going to make a groove in the ground, it's asur. So Rabbi Hildesheim is saying, some people are gesund, heavy. They have a lot of cholet on Shabbat. So if they're riding, especially on a wet road, where some places in the world it's always raining, right? Like the East Coast. So he wants to. So Rav Ovadia rejects this also. As he says, first of all, the Beis Yosef doesn't bring such an idea. The Magen Avram is only according to the Ashkenazim. And first of all, at most, Maran would hold that this is a psik resha, this is a rabbinic. To make those grooves is not a isser from Torah, it's rabbinic. And since you're not driving, you're riding it in a public area, it's psik resha de lo nichale. This is one of the most important rules of Shabbat. Psik resha de lo nichale means that, okay, you are making a groove, but you don't care. And it's rabbinic. Rav Ovadia brings very clear rayas that this is rabbinic. And a rabbinic sin that you have no benefit from, even though it happens inevitably, it's okay, he holds. So therefore, Rav Ovadia rejects this, and we want to bring a second reason why this is not a problem, because I was looking up in the English books of the Ashkenazim, it seems that this is a big chidush. Why? Because the Ashkenazic poskim, even that are very machmir, by the way, even on the rabbinic laws of Shabbat, most poskim, even Ashkenazim, hold that pushing a wheelchair in a place that has an Eruv or a baby carriage is not considered making a groove. Why? Because there's a fundamental difference between digging a groove where you're going to plant seeds in than making a groove with a bike, because it's more of like, why is a carriage and a wheelchair not this problem? Because they hold it's indentation and not digging dirt. It's a depression of dirt. Rav Ovadia, so many different poskim, the Shmir Shabbos Kel Chasa, and many poskim bring it. So this is also Rav Ovadia totally rejects. It's a chiddush that Rabbi Hilda Samer says that, and that's not a reason to ask. So Rav Ovadia just brings out, the bottom line is that Shabbat, you're not allowed to take unusual steps, like large strides and run. Mm-hmm. And for sure, driving a bike, people use in Europe, and especially now today with the green energy bill, they want to make. Even today, a lot of people bike to work, right? So Rav Ovadia says that it's not appropriate to do this on Shabbat, right? It's against the spirit of the law, and it falls under that broad category of uvdin dechol. And somebody that's such a prince of Torah as great as Rav Ovadia has the halachic authority to tell us that this is not appropriate to do, because this is similar to that. It's not making a new gzera. You know why? Because uvdin dechol is a very fluid thing. You understand? And Rav Ovadia compares this to the Gemara in Betzah, the Ran there, that says, do you know how like the old kings, people used to take them out on these royal, 4 people used to hold like poles, and the person like used to sit on a chair, like Aladdin. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah.
Right, like the shahs and the kings So he says it's usher to do that on Yontiv. The Gemara says, and that's the halacha. Why? Because people used to do that to take the chashuv of people to meet. They're like the king. They used to do that for the king to go meet and greet his people. Shabbat is not a day to meet and greet, right? Shabbat is a day. So you see, the Chachamim is not in the spirit of the law. The Shelas Yaakov agrees to this, and he brings another gzeira. He says, if people see you biking, where are you going to? People may think that you're biking to work, and he says, the Shelas Yaakov says that we've never heard any Frum Jews biking on Shabbat. And that's kind of what Rav Ovadia is against it. He says, with all due respect, Rav Ovadia obviously has no problems arguing on the Bnei Ish Chai. That's the whole controversy. But not that Chas v'Shalom Rav Ovadia disrespects Bnei Ish Chai. It's to the contrary. He respects the Bnei Ish Chai, but he says, that's how the Torah is. Anybody that's in Gemara, Ravina argues on Rav Ashi. Resh Lakish was a student of Rav Yochanan and became a Talmud Chaver. But, in Torah, the truth triumphs everything. So, many of the Ashkenazic poskim also follow Rav Ovadia and not the Bnei Ish Chai. One of the greatest poskim that was the biggest expert on medical halacha, tremendous gaon. He was on the Supreme Court Beddin of the Rabbi Eliezer Wallenberg. He also is not too happy about bikes. He's concerned about Rav Masas's problems, that you're going to fix it and it's not Shabbos. They say Rav Eliashiv was against it. So it's not only Rav Ovadia that's like being machmir here. Right. You have the Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Eliashiv doesn't like it. And one of the great Hasidic poskim, the Ber Moshe, also says, our minhag is not to, we don't ride bikes on Shabbat for many reasons. But he actually goes deeper into it than Rav Ovadia does. He says, first of all, if a kid's under 5-6 years old and he really likes biking and there's an Eruv, okay, you could let him bike. The Rav Moshe Stern, he was a great Hasidic Avdestin and Posek, right? He says, because you don't want to ruin his fun on Shabbat, right? But he says once the kid has gotten to the chinuch age, which some people already hold that's 3 or 5 or 6 or 7, right? Keharf Sarish Mishe. The Ber Moshe, which is a very choshev and poskim, everybody brings him down, a very choshev, a Hasidic poskim. He holds that it shouldn't be done by children that are gone into the age of 6, 7. He says a tricycle is a whole different animal. A tricycle, everybody knows it's a kid plaything. And usually kids don't travel a few miles with their tricycle, right? They go around the block at most. So he says the tricycle is not in this gzera. Okay. But he says that he brings a beautiful halacha that I just like. It's cute. He says take off the bell, so because it's forbidden to use like the, right? Everything we're talking about is non-electric, but the bell, you can't use bells on Shabbat. So if the tricycle has a bell, he says if you want your little baby toddler to use his tricycle on Shabbat, you'd have to take off the bell. Chacham Ben Sion also says that tricycles are okay. But here Rav Ovadia is very tough on this halacha. And I guess it seems that Rav Ovadia saw that this could be abused, right? And I'm going to tell you at the end of the class why. Rav Ovadia holds, even tricycles. Look what Rav Ovadia writes, and I'll read for you. It's on page Mem Gimel. He says, "V'nira dahainu davka bekatan shelo higia lechinuch." Rav Ovadia argues on the Ber Moshe, and he says that even tricycles are for kids that are 6, 7, under 6, under 7. But once they've gotten to things, since it's similar to bikes, it shouldn't be. He argues on Chacham Ben Sion. He says even he holds no. Chacham Ben Sion agrees to me. The fact that Chacham Ben Sion says tricycles okay, those are for toddlers. But once the kid is old enough, he shouldn't use it. And Rav Ovadia just ends off with the idea that it makes absolutely no difference, right? Whether Shabbat or Yom Tov, we are not allowed to ride the bikes on Shabbat. But it's important to know that one should not think that anybody that does ride Shabbats on bikes on Shabbat, whether there's an Eruv, is not a shaygis, obviously. Why? Because the Ben Ish Chai and the Kaf HaChaim, and there are very many. There's a Marshag. There's Chashuv Poskim that holds it's okay, but it seems the minhag of the Orthodox world, the Haredi world, the real Torah world, is not to do it, and that brings me to the second part of the shir, because we're talking about Uvdin Dechol. So, to just finalize that and that chapter of the class, the next part is going to be a few minutes. Rabbes, the poskim that I talk to, say that it's also not right. Kids could get fall and get hurt, and it's just not in the spirit of Shabbat, right? And that's what Rav Ovadia is saying, that the minhag was not to do this. Rabbi Bess from LA says that. He said he asked Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in the 80s, and scooters and bikes would be the same thing. It's not in the spirit of Shabbat. Now, just to finish off this shir with the laws of children, because we're talking about children, and children are... It says that there's a very interesting halacha brought down in Shulchan Aruch that you're not allowed to play soccer or any type of marbles, especially children, which on a dirt floor. Do you know why? Because this is a gzera from the Chachamim, from the Talmud, because in the olden days,
the indentation?
Yeah, the ground would be uneven, and the Chachamim were worried that if children or even adults, but even children, would play marbles or any ball game, and then it would rain, and then there would be potholes and different things. They're so into the game, as we know, people do riots because of games, and when one is excited, he may forget that it's Shabbat. So this is a halach in Shulchan Aruch. Everybody agrees to that. Now Rav Ovadia just brings a heter that in the same chapter, Hilchot Choresh, Halacha Zayin, he says, but according to the Sfardim, If it's a marble floor, a concrete floor, the kids could play marbles. Like, it's like a game. I forgot the name of the game. Like Jackson Marble, whatever. And because he says we don't hold it's a problem by mopping either. Because the gzera is you're going to level the floor, right? Take away the potholes and the indentations in the floor. But how can you make such a gzera if there's a solid concrete or marble or whatever asphalt floor? So he says, even on the grass, if you put a table or a mat, right, the kids could play on that. And he says even the Ramah would agree to that. So if you put a flat, solid surface on top of the earth, grass, ground, Rabbi Ovadia says, so he says, Shasur kibud abayit, he says inside the house, Rabbi Ovadia holds it's for sure not a problem even according to the Ashkenazim. Because no house in the modern world doesn't have some type of flooring in it, unless you live in Africa. So Rabbi Ovadia would say that this is not a problem. So soccer, according to everybody on a field, is problematic because fields are grass. Unless it's an artificial field, then it'd be okay, right? And I just wanted to finish with balls. Balls, according to the Sfardim, are muksa. So once a kid is of age, he shouldn't be touching it. Now there's a Prima Godim that says these are only balls that could pop balls that are solid like foam. It could be there less, but I just wanted to bring to your attention that two things, and that is that the Talmud Yerushalmi, and the Peliot brings this a few times, the Yerushalmi says, why did God give us Shabbat?
To learn Torah.
Exactly. Hashem, and this is such a, I have a shiur, Make Shabbat Great Again. This is such a fundamental difference between people that are B'nai Torah and not, that it's their Shabbat is the difference between day and light. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The bottom line here is that Jews that want to just throw out the door the spirit of the law, we've seen from the Modocs community that they're not going to stay Jewish. It's not going to last. Torat Hashem Temimah, like we just learned in the Mesilas Yesharim. We have to try to be the best Jews possible. So you always have to go and understand Nasa v'nishma, right? We do the halacha, but what's the reason behind the halacha? Well, the Talmud Yerushalmi says don't work. Doesn't mean don't work and go your entire Shabbat play backgammon like those old Persian men do or cards. No. You should learn. I saw a beautiful thing. And one of the great Chabad rabbis, he chazes all the 7 daf of Daf Yomi that he gives. Amazing. He gives them like he says, okay, we learned Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi is very hard to digest. So on Shabbat, we'll chazed all the, right? What an amazing leader. What an amazing vision he has, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that a lot of times the reason why this scootering and biking and playing ball, because the Beis Yosef brings the Medrash, Eicha, chapter B, that it says that one of the great towns with hundreds of thousands of people in Israel was destroyed during the time of the destruction of Yerushalayim because they would play ball on Shabbat. So you're going to come and tell me that the letter of the law doesn't matter. Hundreds of thousands of people are wiped out, and the Bet Yosef Maran brings this. La halacha.
Yeah, also something that's very important amongst all this is also you can't just pick and choose whatever you want just because it may keep you.
Right. Exactly.
You can't be like, he says it here, I'm going to pick this one.
Yeah.
Oh, this one goes over here.
That's you're right.
Cherry pick halachot to say whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So it's saying somebody.
What it technically says it.
Yeah, no. So that's another unethical thing. One has to have integrity in his following of halacha, which means if you're always following Rav Ovadia's halachas, now you want to go decide to ride a bike because Ben Ishchai. So whatever everybody says,
you just keep
your Judaism becomes like a suit that is patched up.
Yeah.
And it's going to end up looking pretty ugly.
Yeah.
So I agree with you 100%. And even more than that is that we see from the unbelievable amount of rabbinical laws on Shabbat that the Chachamim, Amira La'akum, Mukse, Chachamim were more concerned about the spirit of the law than the law itself. So already you're not found. You understand? So that's why, if anybody asks me, I would go with the Ben Ish Chai and say you shouldn't ride a bike and you shouldn't. And also, like this great book written by one of the Talmidim of my yeshiva, Rabbi Birnbaum, which was one of the greatest tzaddikim of our generation. He wrote a whole book on tefillah. He writes, listen, in the end of the day, even according to Ashkenazim, playing ball, you're missing the point. And
it's not the spirit of the law.
I mean, listen, we have to give kids a kosher outlet, but the Pelio, it's just something that really, really shtuch is out. And he says, listen, since the Yerushalmi says the whole reason Hashem gave us Shabbat and the Jewish holidays is not to work and just go take a 5-hour bike ride, not to work so you could learn, right? So Peliyot says, after 120 years, one of the first questions you're going to get judged on and punished on, the first question is what? Were you honest in business? There's a Taisus in Kedushin, which exactly was the first question, but let's go with that. The Gemara in Shabbat, Daf Lamed Gimel, that Lamed Aleph, that the first question that Hashem asks you is, were you honest in business? The second question is, did you have a set time to learn? So one could argue and say, hey, Hashem, I had to put food on the table, right? Peliyot says, but then Hashem's going to tell you,
were you poorer than?
Shabbat, you didn't. Okay, so let's say during the 6 days of the week, you were exhausted. That's why you really didn't learn, because you didn't have the energy to learn. But Shabbat, you didn't have to work. So he says, when you don't learn on Shabbat, it shows that you're not interested in learning. You're just a lazy bum. So then Hashem's going to punish you for all the other days of the week. Because it shows that your heart is not in there, right? So again, this is coming back to a much larger picture. The Baruch Hashem, we started the TTT podcast to give chizuk to people to learn every day and be a masmid. Like the Nefesh HaChaim says, the crown of Torah has fallen out. There used to be a time that you would be ashamed of yourself, of not being a knowledgeable Jew. Nowadays, there's so many ignoramuses out there, but that's not what Hashem wants.
Misinformation.
Yeah. We need to use our time wisely, and especially the Ben Ish Chai brings another beautiful idea.
So Maisa, we should not be riding bikes.
Yeah, we shouldn't. So at a conclusion to this year, it is inappropriate. It's not in the spirit of Shabbat
to ride a bike,
to ride a scooter, even for your children. Rav Ovadia is vehemently against it. Basketball is also against the spirit of the law. You could put board games, and listen, kids could do some. Kids need an outlet on Shabbat. The Shabbat day is like a 12-hour ordeal. Yeah. They could play board games. They could play, checkers or chess or something like that. But again, the majority of the time should be used for to learn Torah, because in the end of the day, the Ben Ish Chai says that one word of learning Torah on Shabbat is 1,000 times more spiritually, Kabbalistically powerful than learning during the weekday.
Wow. So
that's why we had great Gedolim and Tzaddikim that they wouldn't hardly sleep on Shabbat, because they wanted to tap into this energy. It's such a shame. Shabbat is meant to be... my Rebbe, Harav Ben David, just to finish with him, he was a student of the Hazon Ish, such one of the greatest men I ever knew. Such integrity and such originality. He said, it's such a misconception that on Shabbat people shouldn't work. You shouldn't work from physical labor, but it's a day to work. Yeah, you have to work inside to build up your neshama, to make it lofty and climb that ladder of the Mesilat Yesharim to become knowledgeable and holy and special, because that's what a Jew is. Thank you. Have a wonderful